What would you do if you spent a night of passion with someone who felt like the answer to every question you had stopped asking, and woke up the next morning to find out he was getting married to someone else? What would you do if the man who asked you to be patient, who looked at you like you were worth waiting for, who held you in the dark and made you feel chosen, was already walking toward the altar for another woman? What would you do if you realized, too late, that you were never the story? You were just the chapter he needed before he went back to the one he always wanted. Welcome to Forbidden Love Stories, where we tell the loves that were never supposed to happen and the betrayals that were always coming. Subscribe right now and hit that bell. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us if you have ever loved someone who was already gone before they left. We are reading every single one. Now let us go back to where this all started. Alicia Carter had one rule. She had built it carefully, the way you build something after watching someone else be destroyed without one. Her mother, Diane, a Black American woman from Atlanta who loved the way some people breathe, completely, and without strategy, had given everything she had to a man who treated her warmth like a place to rest between other lives. Alicia had watched her mother shrink, watched her make herself quieter, smaller, easier to hold, as if the problem had always been that she was too much. She had decided at 17, sitting outside her mother's bedroom door, listening to sounds she was not supposed to hear, that she would not be that woman. She would not love someone who was already leaving. So the rule was simple. One night. No names. No mourning. Walk away clean. It had held for years. Right up until the last night of August, in a rooftop bar in Seoul, the evening before the first day of the rest of her life. She had moved from Atlanta 3 weeks earlier for this job, the one that had taken 2 applications for interviews and more faith in herself than she usually allowed. She was celebrating alone, which felt appropriate. She ordered something she could not pronounce and sat with it and let herself feel, just for a moment, like she had built something real. That was when she noticed him. He was Korean, sitting 2 stools away with a glass he had barely touched, staring at the skyline like it owed him something. His suit jacket was draped over the stool beside him, sleeves rolled to the forearm, collar open. He had the particular stillness of someone who was used to rooms adjusting to him. But tonight, in this bar, he was just a man sitting alone with something unresolved. He didn't look at her. Not once. Every other man in that bar had found a reason to glance over within minutes. This one was somewhere else entirely. She spoke first. "You look like someone canceled something important." He turned, and the way he looked at her, not through her, not at the surface of her, but at her, like she was a sentence he wanted to read carefully, made something in her chest do something it was not supposed to do. "Something like that," he said. His English was precise, unhurried, belonging to a man who had learned it properly and then lived in it long enough for the formality to soften. "You? Tomorrow is a big day. I just needed to breathe." He nodded the way people nod when they actually understand what you mean. They talked, and then they kept talking. No names. That was her rule, and he seemed, without being told, to understand and honor it. They talked the way strangers sometimes talk when they are freed from the obligation of being known, about pressure and family and the loneliness of building something that belongs to everyone but yourself. He talked about duty in the way Koreans talk about it, not as a burden exactly, but as a current, something you swim in whether you chose to or not. She talked about Atlanta and her mother and the specific kind of woman she had decided not to become. He listened like her words were things he intended to keep. By midnight, she had laughed more than she had in months. By 1 in the morning, she had told him things she had never said out loud. The conversation had long since stopped being a conversation between strangers and become something else. Something that felt dangerous in the way that only honest things feel dangerous. By 2, they were no longer in the bar. The hotel room was on the 22nd floor with the city stretched out below the window like a second sky. She remembered thinking, in the cab on the way up, that she was breaking her rule, and then deciding that the rule had always been about protection, and that whatever this was, it already felt like something worth the risk of being hurt by. He was not what she had expected. He was careful in a way that felt deliberate, like a man who understood the difference between taking something and being given something. There was a moment, early, when he pulled back and looked at her, really looked, the same way he had at the bar, like she was a sentence worth reading all the way to the end, and asked, without a word, whether she was certain. She answered him, and the way something shifted in his face when she did, something that was not quite relief and not quite joy, but somewhere between the two. She would not forget that for a very long time. What stayed with her afterward was not any single moment, but the accumulation of them. The way he said nothing when there was nothing worth saying, and that silence felt like company rather than distance. The way his hand rested at the curve of her back like it belonged there. The way he laughed, quietly, just once, when she said something unexpected, and how that small sound from a man who seemed to ration his warmth felt like being led inside somewhere private. They talked in between, which she had not expected. Not conversation to fill space, but conversation because neither of them wanted to stop. He told her things she suspected he did not tell many people, about the weight of a name, about the difference between being the son of something great and being great yourself, about the particular loneliness of being surrounded at all times by people who needed you to be fine. She understood every word of that. She left at 4 a.m. He was awake when she got up, lying still in the dark, watching her dress with an expression she could not fully read. She waited, shoes in her hand, for him to ask her to stay, to ask her name, to give her one reason to hesitate. He just looked at her, quiet, that same unreadable stillness. She left. She told herself in the elevator that it meant nothing. In the cab, in her apartment. She almost convinced herself by the time she fell asleep. She did not know his name. She did not know that he lay in that room for a long time after she left, staring at the ceiling, feeling something that did not yet have a word. She did not know that weeks earlier, across a boardroom table, he had seen her name on a candidate list and approved her application himself. She was the first person in the boardroom on Monday morning. She had arrived 30 minutes early because that was who she was. A Black American woman in a Korean corporate environment had already decided to be undeniable before anyone had the chance to have doubts. Presentation printed. Notes organized. Blazer pressed. She was ready. The door opened, and Sung-min Kwon walked in. The same quiet, the same stillness, the same eyes that had looked at her in the dark of a hotel room like she was the most interesting thing he had encountered in years. Except now an entire room of executives was rising from their seats as he entered, and his name was on the building, and the weight of a billion-dollar empire sat across his shoulders like it had always been there. He sat at the head of the table. He opened a folder. He looked up and found her face immediately, like he had already known exactly where she would be sitting. Not a single thing moved in his expression. Not a flicker. Nothing. Good morning, everyone. Let us begin. He looked back down at his documents. Welcome to the team, Ms. Carter. That was all. The meeting continued. Her hands were flat and still on the table. Her face gave nothing away. But underneath that table her knee was shaking so hard, she had to press her palm against it to stop it. She told herself she would request a transfer by Friday. She was still there 8 months later. The first time he made her feel like something more than an employee, she told herself it was professional courtesy. It was her 3rd week. A senior director named Park Jae-hyun had been cutting across her in meetings since day 1, not aggressively, just consistently, the way men who have never had to make space for anyone do it without noticing. Mid-sentence. Every time. That Tuesday he did it again. Alicia was 3 slides into her presentation when Park Jae-hyun simply began talking over her like she had already finished. Sung-min set his pen down. Let her finish. 2 words. Delivered with the calm of a man who never needs volume to be heard. The room went still. Park Jae-hyun straightened and nodded. Alicia continued. Sung-min did not look at her after. He looked at his notes, like the correction had cost him nothing, like it was simply the correct thing to do. But that night in her apartment, she sat with that moment for longer than she should have. She filed it away and said nothing. The second time was October. Late. The floor was empty except for the 2 of them. A punishing product deadline had kept the team past 10 for weeks. That night the last colleague packed up at 11:15, leaving them alone in the glass-walled conference room with soul burning quietly below. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one. Set one in front of her. Sat back down. Said nothing. They worked in silence. His jacket was over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled exactly the way they had been that night at the hotel bar, and she had to actively keep herself from thinking about that. Then, without looking up from his screen, he said, "You are very different here than you were that night." The sound of her typing stopped. He had never acknowledged it before, not once in 3 months. She had almost begun to believe he had decided, for both their sakes, to behave as though it had not happened. "Different how?" she said carefully. He looked up, directly at her, across the table, with that attention she recognized from the bar. "Smaller. Like you were trying to take up less space than you actually need." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at her screen. "I am at work," she said. "I know," he said. A few minutes later, as she was putting on her coat to leave, he walked her to the elevator, something he had never done. While they waited in the corridor, he said, quietly, without looking at her, "For what it is worth, you do not have to be smaller here. Not with me." The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed between them. She stood with her hand pressed flat against her sternum the whole way down, trying to slow her own heartbeat. She first heard the name Young Yun on a Wednesday in November, passing the executive corridor. A female voice through a half-open door, speaking in Korean, low and deliberate. Alicia had been learning Korean quietly since she arrived, enough to understand the shape of things. The woman was asking about the American. She used the English word the way someone uses a word to make a thing smaller than it is. Alicia kept walking. She asked a colleague about Young Yun Park over lunch, casually. The colleague's expression shifted the way people's expressions shift when they are deciding how much to say. She and Mr. Kwon grew up together. Their families have always been close. She studied abroad for years, Paris, then London. She came back last month. "Are they close?" Alicia asked. The colleague looked at her food. "They were once. I think some people in the company believe they will be again." 2 days later, Alicia stepped into the elevator, and Young Yun stepped in beside her. She was beautiful in a way that required effort made invisible. Tall, immaculate, composed with the ease of a woman whose family had taught her that every room was a room to be owned. She looked at Alicia the way a woman looks at something she has already categorized. She smiled. A perfect smile. It reached nothing behind it. "You must be Miss Carter. Sungmin speaks very highly of your work." The way she said his name, Sungmin, first name, easy and proprietary as breathing, told Alicia everything the smile had been designed to conceal. The elevator opened. Young Yun stepped out first. Alicia stood in the closing doors and understood, with the clarity of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life, that this woman had come to this elevator on purpose. In February, he asked her something she was not prepared for. A one-on-one strategy session, nothing unusual on the calendar. 30 minutes in, he set his pen down and looked at her across the desk. "Can I ask you something that has nothing to do with work?" Her pen stopped. "That night at the bar, you told me about your mother. You said you had decided you would rather feel nothing than feel that. That loving someone who was already leaving was the one thing you would never let yourself do." He held her gaze. "Do you still believe that?" The silence lasted long enough that she could hear the city outside. "I am less certain of it than I used to be," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but something looser. Something that looked almost like relief. "Good," he said quietly. He picked up his pen, and the meeting continued exactly as before. She walked back to her desk and stared at her screen for 3 full minutes without typing a word. She thought about Young Yun's smile in the elevator. She thought about the way he had just looked at her. She pressed her fingers to her keyboard and made herself work. March came, and the careful professional distance she had maintained for 8 months started dissolving in ways she could not account for. There was a team dinner after a major deal closed. Warm restaurant, shared relief, the kind of evening where office formality melts. Sungmin sat across from her, and they ended up in a conversation that started with the deal and wandered, as their conversations always eventually did, into everything else. He asked about Atlanta. Really asked. Not surface questions, but specific ones. What it smelled like in summer, whether she had ever felt like 2 different people living in one body, whether she had ever had to choose between who she was and who a room expected her to be. She looked at him for a moment before she answered. Every single day, she said. He nodded slowly. Me too, he said, quietly, without elaboration, like it was simply true and he was tired of not saying it. The rest of the team left one by one. They stayed, not by agreement, but by not leaving. The restaurant staff had begun quietly stacking chairs. Neither of them suggested going until there was no other option. Outside on the pavement, Seoul was cold and bright. He flagged her a cab, held the door. She looked back through the rear window as the car pulled away. He was still standing there, watching the cab until it turned the corner. She turned back around and stared straight ahead and told herself firmly, "This is nothing. There is nothing here." But her hands were in her lap, and she could not make them stop shaking. It was the last Friday of March when it happened. She had stayed late to finish a report. The floor was empty. She was in the small kitchen making tea when she heard his footsteps and told herself, "Just say good night and leave." He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for months, like she was the most visible she had ever been in her life. "You are still here," he said. "So are you," she said. He leaned in the doorframe for a moment. Then, "Come, I want to show you something." He took her to the roof. The building had a terrace that was never used after hours. Seoul spread out below them in every direction, and he stood beside her at the railing and told her that this was the first place he had come when his father handed him the company 8 years ago, that he had stood in this exact spot trying to understand what it meant to own something that owned you back. She listened. She watched his profile against the city lights and understood, in the way you understand things before you are ready to, that she was in serious trouble. They talked for 2 hours on that roof. About fear. About the difference between the life you build and the life that is built for you. About what it costs to be the person a family needs you to be. He talked about Young Yun once, not by name, carefully, obliquely, and she heard the shape of what he wasn't saying. That there had been something there, once. That it had been decided for him in ways he was still learning to live inside. She did not push. She let the words land and settle between them in the cold air. At some point the talking stopped and the silence that replaced it had weight. She was acutely aware of how close they were standing. He did not move away. Neither did she. She does not know, even now, which of them moved first. What she knows is that it was different from the hotel bar. That first night had been two strangers finding warmth in the dark, honest precisely because they had nothing to protect. This was 8 months of something arriving, finally, at the word it had always been building toward. This was a man she had watched defend her without fanfare and pour her coffee without asking and look at her across rooms like she was worth looking at. And a woman who had spent 8 months trying to make herself stop feeling exactly what she felt. They did not leave the building. In the quiet of his office, with the floor-to-ceiling windows turning Seoul into something that looked almost gentle, there was none of the uncertainty of that first night. She knew him now. She knew how he went still when something mattered to him. She knew the particular quality of his silence, that it was never absence but attention, the closest he came to saying things out loud. And he knew her. The way she held herself when she was being brave, the way she laughed when something caught her off guard, the softness underneath the discipline that she kept carefully out of sight at all times except, apparently, with him. He was slower this time, more deliberate, like a man who understood, on some level he had not yet named, that this might be the last time he allowed himself this, and was not willing to spend it carelessly. He held her face in his hands at one point and looked at her with an expression she had no category for, something between grief and certainty, and she almost asked him what it meant. She almost asked. She didn't. In the small hours of the morning, she was lying with her head against his chest, his arm around her, the city glowing below them, and she made the decision she had been fighting since August. She sat up. She looked at him, and she told him the truth, that she had spent 8 months trying to make what she felt smaller than it was, and she was done trying. That she, Alicia Carter, Black American woman from Atlanta, who had built her whole life around never needing anyone, was telling him plainly and without strategy that she was in love with him. She said it, and she held it, completely still, watching his face. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled. A real one, the kind she had seen so rarely that it changed his whole face when it arrived. He reached out and touched her jaw, just lightly, his thumb tracing the line of it like he was memorizing the shape. "Give me until tomorrow," he said. She searched his face. There was nothing there but the smile and his eyes and his hand still warm against her jaw. "Tomorrow," she said. He pulled her back down beside him. She fell asleep with his arm around her and the city below and something in her chest that felt, for the first time in her adult life, like it had finally come to rest. She woke before dawn, dressed quietly, walked to the elevator with her coat over her arm, feeling lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow. The lobby was full of white roses. She stopped the moment she came through the revolving doors. It was a Saturday morning. Early, she had come in to collect some files. The building should have been quiet. It was not quiet. Tall glass vases lined every wall. White petals scattered across the marble floor. Event coordinators moved through the space with clipboards and the polished efficiency of people preparing for something that had been planned for a very long time. She stood in the middle of it and could not move. Then she saw the banner, floor to ceiling, printed overnight. The Quan Park wedding celebration. 1 month from today. Beneath it, a framed photograph. Sung Min in a dark suit. Beside him, her hand resting on his arm. Young Yun, smiling the same perfect smile she had given Alicia in the elevator. The coffee hit the floor. She heard it crack against the marble, felt the warmth splash across her shoe. She did not look down. She stood completely still with the sound of the lobby moving around her. The coordinators, the flowers, the distant cheerful noise of chairs being arranged, and she understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, everything that smile in the elevator had meant. Young Yun had known for months, probably longer, had come to that elevator not to introduce herself, but to deliver a message wrapped so politely Alicia had almost missed it. Sungmin speaks very highly of your work. Translation: I know you exist. I am not threatened. I have already won. He had known too. The date was already set. The venue booked. The banner printed and waiting. He had known last night when he smiled and said, "Give me until tomorrow." He had known every late night, every coffee set down without asking, every time he had looked at her like she was worth looking at. He had known the whole time where he was going, and he had let her fall anyway. A junior staff member appeared at her elbow. "Ms. Carter, let me get that." "Thank you," she said, completely steady. She bent down, picked up the largest piece of the broken cup, and placed it in the bin by the reception desk. Then she walked to the bathroom, locked the stall, sat down on the cold tile floor in her good coat, and pressed her back against the wall. She gave herself 7 minutes. She counted them. Then she stood up, fixed her face, and walked back out. She sent a meeting request from her phone before she reached the elevator. He cleared his morning and called her in within the hour. She walked through his office door, closed it behind her, sat across from his desk, and kept her voice completely level. "You knew?" He did not pretend not to understand. His jaw tightened, just slightly. "Yes," he said. "How long?" A pause that was itself an answer. The date was set 14 months ago. 14 months. He had hired her knowing. He had poured her coffee knowing. He had defended her in meetings, walked her to elevators, asked her whether she still believed she would rather feel nothing, all of it knowing. He had held her last night and smiled, and said, "Give me until tomorrow," knowing that in the morning the lobby would be full of flowers for another woman. "Last night," she said. Her voice did not shake. She would not give him that. "You knew last night, and you still said give me until tomorrow." Something moved across his face that had no clean name. Not guilt, not regret. Something more complicated and more painful than either. "I know," he said. Did she know? Young Yun. Did she know about me? The pause was long enough to be its own answer. She knew there was someone I was finding it difficult to. "Stop," Alicia said. He stopped. She looked at him. She took her time. She wanted to remember exactly what this looked like. This man, this desk, this office, this version of herself sitting in this chair. So she would never mistake this feeling for anything other than what it was. "You told me I didn't have to be smaller here. Not with you." Her voice was quiet and precise. "And then you let me grow, and grow, and grow, in a direction that was never going to have anywhere to go." He said nothing. His hands were flat on the desk, and she could see that his knuckles were pale. "You never lied to me. That is true, but you let me feel like a promise. And I think you knew exactly what you were doing the whole time and told yourself that made it acceptable. It didn't. She stood up, picked up her bag. I hope she makes you happy. I genuinely do. Because what you did to me, I would not wish it on anyone. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle, turned back just once, long enough to look at him one final time, sitting behind that desk with the expression of a man who had just understood what he was choosing to lose. And then she opened the door and walked out. She did not cry on the elevator. She did not cry walking out of the building, or on the subway, or on the stairs of her apartment. She went home. She made the stew she had taught herself since arriving in Seoul. A blend of two kitchens, two cultures, entirely its own thing now. She folded laundry. She watered the plant on her windowsill that had survived an entire Korean winter. Then she called her mother. She didn't say anything about him, just listened to her mother's voice, the warmth of it, the Atlanta in it, the specific sound of a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself anyway, and felt the ache of understanding her mother in a way she had never wanted to understand anyone. She submitted her resignation that Monday, for weeks' notice because she was a professional. She came in every day and did her work completely. She did not avoid him. She did not seek him out. She was cordial and focused and undeniable right up until her last day, because she had come to this city to prove something about herself, and she was not going to let him take that from her. On her last day, she found a small card on her desk. No name on the envelope. Inside, in handwriting she recognized. You were never small here. You never have to be. She read it once. Put it in her bag. Finished her last day. She found a new apartment in a different part of Seoul, because she loved this city and she was not going to let him take it from her either. She found a new job. She rebuilt. She was fine. She was almost fine. Right up until the night, 3 weeks after the wedding date on that banner, when a news notification lit up her phone. The Kwan Park wedding. Society pages. Official photographs. She stared at the notification for a long time before she opened it. Sung-min at the altar in a perfect dark suit. Young-yeon beside him, radiant, immovable, victorious in the way that women who have been planning something for a long time are victorious when it finally arrives. His face was composed. Unreadable in the way she now understood meant he was holding something very tightly inside. In his lapel, a single white rose. Alicia set her phone face down. She pressed both hands flat against the table, and she let herself feel it. All of it, every piece. The hotel bar and the late nights and the coffee and the rooftop and the dark of his office and his arm around her and the sound of "Give me until tomorrow." She cried for a long time. Not just for him. For herself. For the girl from Atlanta who had finally, after 26 years of armor and exits, taken the walls down, and found that love alone was not enough to make someone brave enough to choose differently. For her mother. For every woman who ever grew in a direction that someone else had no intention of meeting. When it was over, she wiped her face, sat up straight, looked at the Seoul skyline through her window, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her with how clean it felt, I am not my mother. My mother waited by the window. I walked away. And next time, I will know the difference between a man who is choosing me and a man who is only brave enough to want me. She picked up her phone, deleted the notification, blocked the account. Then she opened a new message and typed her mother's name. Hey Mama, I finally understand something you tried to tell me a long time ago. Can we talk this weekend? She hit send. She put the phone down. She sat in the quiet and breathed. Across Seoul, in the honeymoon suite of the Grand Hyatt, the wedding reception had ended an hour ago. Young-yeon was asleep, or performing sleep, which with her had always been difficult to distinguish. Perfectly still, perfectly arranged. Sung-min was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his reception suit, the white rose still in his lapel, petals beginning to curl slowly inward in the warmth of the room. He had not removed his jacket. He had not moved toward his wife. He had sat down on the edge of this bed, and he had not moved. The suite was everything it was supposed to be. The flowers, the candles, the city view, the life his family had designed for him. All of it correct, all of it in place, all of it exactly as arranged. He felt none of it. There was a feeling he had expected to have tonight, The feeling of having done the right thing, of having honored what his family built, of having chosen the woman who had always been beside him, who had come back from Paris and London to come back to him. He had expected some version of peace. Instead, there was a room in a building 6 kilometers away that he could not stop thinking about. A desk with a small plant on the corner. A coffee cup that someone had always replaced before it went cold. A chair that had been empty for 3 weeks in a way he felt every single morning when he walked in. He thought about a rooftop. About a woman who had looked at him and told him the truth without strategy, without anything between the words and the feeling behind them. He thought about what it had felt like to hold her. Not the way you hold something you were given, but the way you hold something you did not know you needed until the moment it was in your arms. He thought about the way she had looked at him across his desk for 8 months with her walls perfectly in place, and how much of his days had been quietly, invisibly organized around the moments when they came down. He thought about the expression on her face when she said "give me until tomorrow" back to him. The trust in it. The complete, unguarded trust. He had not known, or had not let himself know, what that trust was worth until it was gone. He picked up his phone. Her name was still in his contacts. He had opened the screen to delete it 11 times, and each time he had locked the phone and set it down and told himself he would do it tomorrow. Tomorrow, he thought. And something in that word twisted in a way that told him exactly what he had done. Young-Yun shifted in the bed behind him. A small sound. A breath. He looked at his wife. Beautiful. Composed. Exactly as she had always been. He had known her since he was 9 years old. Had loved her once. In the way you love someone who is part of the fabric of your life before you know what love is. He had thought, for years, that what he felt for her was the benchmark. The real thing. The love everything else would be measured against. He looked at her now and felt something he recognized, with a heaviness he had not expected, as fondness. Loyalty. Duty. Not the thing that made a room feel different when someone walked in. Not the thing that made a chair feel empty. Not the thing that made him sit on the edge of his own wedding bed on his wedding night. Unable to move, holding a phone with a name on the screen he could not bring himself to delete. His thumb hovered over her name. He sat like that for a very long time. And the screen went dark. If this story reached somewhere you did not expect, that is exactly what it was supposed to do. Subscribe to Forbidden Love Stories right now and turn on every single notification because what is coming next week will not let you breathe. Drop a comment right now. Did Sung-min ever truly love Alicia? Or was she always just a feeling he was too afraid to name? Did he make the right choice? And has anyone ever made you feel like a promise they had no intention of keeping? Share this video with someone who needs to feel seen today. And next week, 2 women, 1 man, both lied to. Neither of them knew the other existed. Until the day they met. And the conversation that followed changed both of their lives forever. Forbidden Love Stories. We will see you there.